So Star Wars Outlaws was released worldwide yesterday or 4 days ago if you got the gold edition. And I reviewed the game when it first launched with early access, and I had a lot of good things to say about it, but I had a lot of criticisms as well. But since I released that review, this game has practically consumed my life and consumed my soul. Playing this game is pretty much the only thing I do now, and because of that, I have a lot more thoughts that I want to share with you. But still, if you haven't already, you should check out my initial review because I talk about the game in a more broad sense. But also in that video, I ended it in a very indecisive way because I was in love with so many aspects of the game while simultaneously being disappointed by an almost equal amount of other aspects. My first impressions were just very mixed, arguably the most mixed I've ever felt with a newly released game in years. But in this video, I specifically want to dive deeper into the strengths of Star Wars Outlaws because the more hours that I put into this game, the better it got. At the end of the day, I can say I like this game more than I dislike it. I actually like it quite a bit. But in the second half of this video, I'm also going to go deeper into a lot of the very critical flaws that this game has as well. So I'm going to jump into the review, or I guess you could say the review part 2. I'm going to show you some raw gameplay, but before I do that, hit that subscribe button. I talk about video games all the time on this page. I do day one reviews very frequently. I do other video game discussions. The next review I'm going to have for you guys is on September 3rd when I review the casting of Frank Stone, and then on September 6th, I'm going to review Astrobot, a game I'm really looking forward to. But on September 5th, I'm going to play the early access for Warhammer Space Marine 2, and then I'm going to play that game for several days and then release a pretty lengthy review for it on the official launch on September 9th. But then after that, I'm going to review pretty much every big and mid-release of the entire season, so just subscribe if you want to keep up. But anyway, let's talk about Star Wars Outlaws in more detail.
Go get him, buddy.
So once again, let's start off with all the things Star Wars Outlaws gets right, because let me tell you, Ubisoft does get a lot of things right in this game, especially when it comes to how well crafted these worlds are. As soon as I started the game, it blew me away in a visual sense and in an immersive sense, and those feelings only grew stronger with each additional hour that I put into the game. The more missions I did, the more quests I completed, the deeper into the story I went. Star Wars Outlaws does such a good job at making me feel like I was in the world of Star Wars, like I was Kay Vess, and Nix was my buddy, and we existed in this galaxy far, far away, and I was doing all the shit that she was doing, and as a Star Wars fan, at times, this game genuinely feels like a dream come true. From the moment you step out the front doors into the streets of Canto Bight, to riding your speeder through the fields of Toshara, to landing down for the first time on the winter wonderland of Kijimi. There's a lot of handcrafted moments in this game that help really push the immersion and the overall cinematic feel that this game has going for it. From moments when you get onto your spaceship and you fly into orbit and you land at an Imperial space station, and the Imperial space station itself feels like a mini world to explore, full of stormtroopers and officers, side rooms to loot, computers to hack into to get information, and not to mention the story moments to experience, the reason you're there in the first place, to moments when you have to make a quick getaway from that space station and you board your ship and you get the hell out of there, when suddenly TIE fighters are on your ass and the amazing soundtrack starts blaring in true Star Wars fashion as you find yourself now engaged in space warfare. All the way to the moments when you find yourself in an isolated part of a planet, exploring a crashed, decrepit, High Republic-era spaceship, and the game suddenly feels like a Star Wars version of Uncharted, where you're climbing up ledges and swinging over gaps that fall hundreds of feet down, all while finding treasures around every corner and data pads filled with lore. And it's not just the handcrafted story missions either. To my surprise, the game manages to maintain a very cinematic feel throughout a lot of its other content, especially with the more important side quests. There were at least a couple times where I was doing a mission and I genuinely couldn't remember if I was doing a main quest or a side quest, and I was legit kind of shocked when I checked my journal and I saw that it was a side quest, because again, so much of this game maintains a true cinematic Star Wars feel, but not only in terms of the level design and the world design and the attention to detail on paper, but also in practice with a lot of the technical aspects. Star Wars Outlaws is an insanely beautiful game, but not only in terms of the level design and the world design and the attention to detail on paper, but also in practice with a lot of the technical aspects of Star Wars Outlaws. Star Wars Outlaws is an insanely beautiful game. More often than not, I found myself just absolutely flabbergasted at the visuals and the audio design in this game. The lighting is stunning most of the time from all light sources, whether it be Kay's flashlight when you're exploring ruins or sewer systems, or a computer console in an underboss's dimly lit lair, or the sun beating down during the day, the way the winds blow the tall grass around on Toshara, or the snow whipping past you on Kijimi. Again, the sound design is phenomenal as well, from the footsteps that echo around you when you're walking across metal platforms to the epic sounds of the aforementioned TIE fighters that are trying to chase you down and blow you into a million bits. It's just so incredibly immersive, and it truly feels like you exist in the world of Star Wars. In my opinion, this game does for Star Wars fans what the 2018 Spider-Man game did for Spider-Man fans. Remember when that game came out and there was just so much praise for how well that game made you truly feel like Spider-Man, like you were Peter Parker swinging through the streets of New York City. You were the one putting on the mask and fighting crime. You were the one dealing with Mr. Negative and his band of goons. You were the one watching your mentor and Otto Octavius fall down the rabbit hole of insanity and watching Aunt May struggle to maintain feast. That game is great. One of my favorite games of all time, no doubt. But again, in my opinion, this is that game, but for Star Wars fans. Maybe not in the sense of telling a fantastic story set in the world like the Spider-Man game did, but in the sense of just allowing us as players and as fans to live in this world vicariously through the game. And I genuinely think it's being taken for granted a little bit, if I'm being honest with you. I'm not saying all the criticisms of this game are unwarranted, not at all. Trust me, I'm going to get into a bunch of my own criticisms in a bit, nor am I saying this game should have been given 10 out of 10s left and right. I'm not saying that either, but I do think that this game is an unfortunate victim of two things. The first thing being the common hate for Ubisoft these days. It's not a secret that a lot of gamers aren't too fond of Ubisoft as a company, for a lot of valid reasons for sure, and I certainly won't discredit those, but I also think in a lot of ways their games get written off a little too quickly by a little too many people. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to die on the hill of defending a multi-million-dollar company here. In a lot of ways, they've dug their own grave in a lot of people's eyes with their lack of innovation and their tendency to follow their safe formula a little too much. But Star Wars Outlaws is, yes, a Ubisoft open world game. And a lot of the time it feels like one, for better or for worse, but it also changes the Ubisoft formula a lot too. It feels more refined in a lot of ways, not as much needless bloat as a lot of their other games. And I do genuinely think that a lot of people who have written off every Ubisoft game because they don't like their traditional gameplay formula could really end up liking this game. It feels that different from your average traditional Ubisoft game, in my opinion. And honestly, I think I can say that for a good handful of recent Ubisoft titles. Star Wars Outlaws and Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora are both great games, and both of them do such a fantastic job at recreating the worlds from the films they're based on. So much so that if they were made by almost any other studio, I think they would have been met with a lot more fanfare. And also another Ubisoft game that came out this year that's really great is Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. It came out, I think, in January of this year, and to me, it's still, without a doubt, one of the best single-player games of 2024 so far. But anyway, sorry for my side tangent here, but I think my point is valid. I'm not saying Ubisoft is this misunderstood, poor, helpless studio worthy of constant praise, but I think they have been low-key releasing banger after banger lately while simultaneously changing up their formula enough to feel noticeably fresh, but it's going a little underappreciated and undernoticed in the gaming community, not including Skull and Bones. That game was pretty bad, and I think Star Wars Outlaws is a victim of that. Actually, I said I think Star Wars Outlaws is an unfortunate victim of two things. The second thing is, the current state of the Star Wars fandom and how Star Wars is being perceived right now in the general pop culture fandom. And full disclosure, again, I'm a big Star Wars fan. I love the original trilogy, and I also really like the sequel trilogy, I think more than most people. But I said this in my first review for Outlaws, but I'm going to say it again here. I've fallen so behind when it comes to Star Wars media. I haven't watched The Mandalorian Season 3, even though I love that show. I haven't watched Andor or Ahsoka. I haven't seen The Acolyte. I haven't played Jedi Fallen Order or Jedi Survivor, but I've heard from pretty much everyone and their grandma that Star Wars media has suffered from a massive drop-off lately, arguably worse of a drop-off than what the MCU has been seeing these past couple of years. But I think if Star Wars Outlaws was released, say, in the summer after The Force Awakens came out in 2015, I think it would have been met with far more fanfare and far more appreciation, specifically because the vibe in the air was really good back then for Star Wars fans. But because most Star Wars media we get these days is torn into oblivion by fans and by critics, even if it's often justified, it makes the tension in the room very apparent, and it forces new pieces of Star Wars media to fight an uphill battle. But anyways, let's get back into what I like about Star Wars Outlaws. The gameplay, for the most part, is exactly what a third-person shooter set in this universe should be. Shooting enemies is never not fun, and it's always satisfying as hell, no matter how many times I do it. The animations when you shoot your blaster is great, but more specifically, the animations of the people being shot is practically perfect. It's always funny as hell to me, seeing them react to every single shot that I fire and then watching them fall to the ground. This game also kind of pulls an Uncharted 2, where you can pick up enemy weapons and use them yourself, like a Stormtrooper's E11 blaster, but you can never have it with you permanently. You drop them as you do pretty much anything. If you climb a ladder, you drop it. If you jump up on a ledge, you drop it. And it can be annoying, but I think I like it overall. I like the sort of impromptu moments that it can cause during really intense firefights, but I do wish the game wasn't so strict on when you dropped those weapons so you could play around with them just a little bit more. And I also wish there were at least 2 other permanent weapons that you could carry around and customize. It's a bit disappointing that Kay's blaster is the only real weapon, though you do unlock some cool upgrades for it that do change the feel and the use of it. Kay would just look so badass with a sniper rifle slung over her shoulder, and I'm sad we don't get to really do that at all. But one of my favorite gameplay features, though, is undoubtedly Nyx, your little alien pet companion. He comes into clutch so often. You can use him to pickpocket bastards on the streets, or he can crawl through vents and unlock shit for you, but he's the most fun to use during combat. You can have him jump up on a bad guy's face, which basically renders them immobile and allows you to perform a takedown, and he can collect stuff for you during combat too, which is probably the coolest Nyx feature. You can be like, say, barricaded behind a wall and have 10 enemies shooting at you and approaching you, and you could be at like 1% health with no hope in hell to survive, but you could see, say, a health pack 20 feet away from you that you can't get to yourself. You can send Nyx to collect it and bring it back to you. It was just definitely one of my favorite gameplay features in the whole entire game. But again, I said this in my first review, but probably the coolest, most unique thing this game has going for it is the syndicates and the reputation system. This game has several syndicates that exist in this world alongside you: the Pikes, Crimson Dawn, and the Hutts, just to name a few. And pretty much every main story quest and side quest will involve them in some way or another. And there's many points in this game where you have to decide who to side with and who you want to piss off. So for example, you might need to steal some vital information, and you can choose to either steal it from the Pikes or Crimson Dawn. And if you keep pissing off the Pikes, it'll change the game in some pretty crucial ways, like they could try to kill you whenever they see you, which is a pretty big deal because each faction controls entirely different parts of the map. So say you get another side quest, and to your unfortunate dismay, the side quest needs you to enter Pike territory. So you'll either need to blast your way through or stealth it up. But if you were on their good side, you could have just waltzed your way in and did what you needed to do nonchalantly. Maybe even shoot the shit with some Pike members on your way out. But on the flip side, Crimson Dawn likes you, so you can enter their territory freely, and you get discounts on their items and maybe some exclusive gear and an exclusive quest or two that they only give to their friends. It's definitely a really cool feature in the game, and I imagine it'll make replays far more interesting and vary in a lot more ways than they would have otherwise. But like I said in the introduction to this video, Star Wars Outlaws is not a perfect game. It has more than its fair share of flaws, and those flaws I shall get into now.
Something's not right about this, Miss. Let's grab it and go. Now.
The first big critique I have with this game is that most story missions start to feel very samey and repetitive and very quickly on to, again, broken record here if you watched my first review, but I think the first 3 to 4 story missions feel the exact same way in terms of how they play out. You go into a location to steal a thing, you're forced to be stealthy, shit goes wrong, and then you make a run for it while shooting people. Rinse and repeat. And I'm not even exaggerating. Most of the main story missions in the first 10 to 15 hours of this game feel practically identical to each other, but probably the biggest, strongest, girthiest arrow in the chest of this game, the biggest flaw it has, is the horrible way in which enemies respawn. Let me walk you through how it works so you can see how god-awful it is. But let's say you're doing a mission where you need to infiltrate an enemy base, like most missions are. Let's say you start outside of the base and you scale a wall, and there's an enemy on the wall that you take out quietly. Then you go down a ladder. There's an enemy there too, but you use stealth to kill them. Then you hack a door. Oh no! 2 enemies see you. You take them out quickly with your blaster. They're quite isolated, so no other enemies hear you. No alarms go off, no harm, no foul. You keep moving on. You keep going along your way. You take an elevator to the basement. You retrieve the item you came for. Hooray! Victory! And you cleared yourself a nice path that you can use to escape with, where all the enemies along the way are dead. You killed them all by being stealthy, but oh no, you trip and you fall down a hole. You die. No big deal though. You respawn in the basement you worked so hard to get to quietly. But wait, what's this? All fucking enemies have respawned. The enemy on the wall outside, he's back. The enemy at the bottom of the ladder, they're back too. And the 2 enemies you blasted away to hell, somehow, they too have returned. So now you're stuck, trapped in the bottom of an enemy base in the basement where all enemies are back, alive and breathing. So now instead of using your clear getaway that you created for yourself, you have to fight your way out or use stealth again. But the map isn't designed for stealth when coming from the basement, only when you're coming in from the outside. So you're pretty much fucked. So you just end up shooting people and running away. It absolutely sucks, and it kills any sense of immersion during certain missions, and it kills any motivation I have to explore these locations as well as to like find treasure or whatever. They desperately need to fix that, patch it all the way to hell. The enemy AI can also be dumb as a box of doornails too. You can enter an enemy base and shoot up the whole right side of the courtyard, but for some reason everyone on the left side has no idea what's going on. They're just over there, unaware, uncaring, living their best life as I just murdered their coworkers. Also, like I said, there are a decent amount of side quests in this game that feel rewarding and are worth doing, but at least for me, there were way more that just felt like busy work for the sake of busy work, stuff I felt I had no reason to do, so I ignored them, and I plan to continue to ignore them. They don't seem to offer any real rewards or to do anything that clever with the story. This game also does a really horrible thing when it comes to accidentally stumbling upon side quests. Very early on in the game, when I first got to the first open world section, I was just cruising around on my speeder. I came across this tiny little hut where these people lived, and they were being harassed by stormtroopers. I shot the stormtroopers, and then I approached the people. And then when you talk to the people, Kay talks to them as if she had already met them, and as if you had already accepted a quest from them. And then they give you an item as if you already were on contract for receiving this item afterwards. It was just another thing that really sucked and really killed immersion. I hate it when games don't have different programming for when you accidentally do a side quest, where there could be the traditional way that you meet this person, it activates the side quest, you go to the hut, you kill the stormtroopers, and then you retrieve the item. But there should have been a different way where if you happened upon it accidentally, like I did myself, there should have been different dialogue options, and then they just gave you the item because you helped out a stranger. It really, really kills the immersion when the game treats you and acts like you had conversations you didn't have, and that happens very, very frequently. So frequently, it just really made me afraid to talk to NPCs because I was just tired of the immersion being constantly broken. This game is also lacking quite a bit in the story department, unfortunately, but it's not nearly as bad as it was in the first 6 to 7 hours. After certain story quests that I won't spoil, it does pick up. The characters do get more interesting and the stakes start to feel better, but still, the story never managed to truly sink its teeth into me, even though I wish that it did. I also wish I liked using the speeder a lot more than I did. It can be fun to use, and it sounds phenomenal, and it feels great while using the DualSense controller, but I think the problem is that it's too fast, so I'm always worried about running into shit or making sure I'm staying on the path. I can never just take the time to enjoy cruising around on the speeder because it requires your utmost undivided attention. But yeah, that's more or less all of the strongest opinions that I have with Star Wars Outlaws. All the flaws are hard to ignore for sure, but I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't really, really liking this game and that it wasn't definitely one of the best single player experiences that I've had all year. But in terms of who I can recommend this game to, I still stand by what I said in my initial review, was that if you're a big Star Wars fan, if you really like this universe, I think that you can drop $70 on this game and absolutely get your money's worth and not regret it, not one bit. But if you're just a casual fan or you don't care about Star Wars that much at all, I would definitely buy it at a much cheaper price or just wait to play it when there's a lull in games and you have nothing else to play. But anyway, what's your thoughts on Star Wars Outlaws? I look forward to hearing your opinions in the comments down below. Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.